Alright, ladies and gentlemen, about a week or two ago we made a tier list ranking the best free-to-play E0S0 DPSs in Honkai Star Rail. And the thing is, we've done quite a few DPS tier lists, but it's been a very long time since I've done a support tier list ranking. I believe I've only done it once, if ever, although I'm pretty sure I've done it at least once. So, you know what, right now, I think with all of these supports we have gotten in M4S, well, obviously M4S is done, we still have one more version left in the form of version 3.8, but other than that, all the units here in M4S are done. So I figured let's go ahead and check out how the M4S meta rounded out, just how good are some of these supports. Like I said, we've already done the DPSs, so if you want, you can go ahead and check those out. Now, one thing I should mention, all of these supports are going to be ranked at their E0S0 performance, and will only be considering their performance with E0S0 DPS characters. This is supposed to be a full free-to-play ranking, and then also, you know, if you're free-to-play, you kind of want to pull characters which help out more characters. So yeah, that's what we'll be considering, although I'm a bit hesitant to consider their future viability, because although it's definitely an important factor, it's just kind of difficult to predict nowadays in Star Rail, especially with a whole new path coming out of version 4. So we're just going to be ranking them on their performance in version 3.7. We can't really talk about how much staying power they'll have, but yeah, with that being said, let's just hop right into things. But real quick, if you want to pull any characters in Star Rail, then I have the perfect thing for you, and that's the sponsor, lootbar.gg. You can use Lootbar to top up on your favorite games like Honkai Star Rail or Genshin Impact and save up to 25%, along with great value offers like the all-in-one bundle, guaranteed limited and rerun character bundles, and the limited 6,480 Oniric shards pack that lasts for the first week of the brand new version. And now you also have Lootbar's Black Friday sale available to all users between November 25th and December 1st, where you can get up to 10% off and receive double points during the event to redeem rewards or offset future purchases. And as always, you only need to enter in your UID and region to get fast and secure delivery. Creators like DuckTV and Jello Impact are also collaborating with Lootbar, so they are trustworthy, and they also have thousands of positive reviews on Trustpilot. Also, new users can get 10% off, and returning users can get up to 8% off in the first week of the new version. So be sure to check out Lootbar with the link in the description. Back to the video. Alright, well then, let's go ahead and get started with the list. Now, if you guys have seen the DPS one, you'll realize there is one less tier, just because there's less support characters than DPS characters nowadays. But unfortunately, we're gonna have to go ahead and start off with the F tier, and just like the DPS tiers, there's only gonna be one character in the F tier, and it is the most painful placement, because Welt is just such a cool unit, but his kit in Star Rail literally does not make any sense. Hashtag rework Blade in hashtag rework Welt in 2026, please. This guy doesn't just need a buff, he needs a whole kit rework, or maybe just give him a new form. I guess maybe a new form for free would be very nice. You know, maybe version 4.6 comes around and we get a brand new Welt form. I would be very happy with that, that's for sure. But yeah, this guy's kit just doesn't make sense with the slows and stuff. It doesn't help you clear cycles any quicker, it just gives you a little bit of sustain, but nowadays we have sustainers who deal more damage than Welt, so yeah, it just doesn't really make any sense. And then talking about sustainers, next up we have Bailu and Japod, who are both going to be going in the D tier. Although they are serviceable supports, or sustainers rather, this is a support list. This is considering sub DPSs who can't work as main DPSs, along with support and sustainers. If this was just a sustain tier list, they'd be a bit higher, maybe probably like C tier ish. Because this is looking at every single support in the game, we're gonna have to go ahead and unfortunately put them in the D tier, just because they don't really have the, first of all, the sustain potential that some of the brand new ones have. Second of all, some of the just quality of life, as well as the utility that they have. So unfortunately, they will have to go ahead and stay in the D tier. But they will be joined by one other character, who is our first non-standard character, and that's actually going to be Topaz. Topaz is just in a really rough spot. You see, we are normally going to go like chronologically, but I just kind of wanted to throw Topaz in here because then we won't be touching the D tier or below at all in the future. So yeah, unfortunately for Topaz, she just doesn't really have a use case. The only team in which she was good in the first place was Fei Xiao's team, although that was mostly her with her S1, especially E1 S1 Topaz. Technically you could get Topaz for free now, you can even get her E1 for free, but I'd honestly sooner pick a Bronya Eidolon than I would a Topaz, if I'm being entirely honest. If you could get her S1 for free, that would be a different story, but just E0S0 Topaz isn't even best in slot in Fei Xiao teams. She was barely better than March 7th Hunt in the first place, and now with Cypher's release, it's just not worth it whatsoever. So yeah, Topaz is unfortunately gonna have to go ahead and go in the D tier. But moving back into going chronologically, we're gonna have Bronya, and Bronya actually at B tier is solid. Now, unlike limited characters, which will only be looked at E0S0, we can consider like one or possibly even two early Eidolons for some of these standard characters, although realistically we only need to consider their E1 because, Bronya's E2 isn't all that useful. Actually no, to be fair, Bronya's E2 is useful now with finals release, but yeah, because obviously their Eidolons are way more obtainable. First of all, you can get them from 50 losses, you can get them from standard banner, you can guarantee a standard character from the standard banner 300, even though that takes 10 months to take. This list is kind of geared around the endgame meta, and it might take you around 10 months to get to the endgame, so I actually think it's fair to consider. And then you also have the brand new shop, which we've gotten 2 tokens for, where you can also get Bronyas. So technically you could guarantee yourself an E2 Bronya, even if you get unlucky and don't get her whatsoever. And Bronya, she isn't best in slot for anyone, but she is a very decent replacement for Sunday, who is one of the strongest supporters in the entire game. And then also one thing I should mention, we're not touching the MC until we get the Remembrance MC. We can only use one MC. Preservation and Destruction MC are just not worth talking about. And then Harmony MC is just basically not worth talking about either, because we'll already be touching on Super Break later with Fugue, so we're going to be ranking Remembrance MC. But yeah, moving on, as I was saying, Bronya is a pretty decent Sunday replacement. Obviously, she's not perfect. If you're not an attack scaler, you lose out on part of her buff. Her ult uptime isn't as good as Sunday's basically permanent crit damage increase, but the action advance is always going to be nice. She is a decent alternative in Anexa teams, Saber teams, and then also in Final teams at E2 even. At E2 she's, in my opinion, E2 Bronya isn't that much worse than Saridra for Final teams, and then E1 Bronya is also just a very decent unit. E0 Bronya isn't that good, but you can guarantee yourself Bronya's Lightcon from the Star Glitter store, and then also I think it's Star Glitter or Starlight, I don't quite remember, to be honest. And then like I said, if you have just an E1 Bronya, pretty good for Final. E2 Bronya, actually very good for Final, because you can then run him on attack boots. So yeah, that actually gives him quite a lot of buffs, and that is pretty damn nice. But moving on to the C tier, we're actually going to put both of our version 1.1 characters here. Now, Silverwolf, I really wanted to put in the B tier. If we weren't considering sustainers, and I was going to say sub DPSs, to be fair, Topaz is kind of the only sub DPS here, unless you want to count the dot units. But yeah, Silverwolf, although her rework made her pretty decent actually, the problem is there is basically no team where she's better than Cypher. She is a decent alternative to Cypher, but the problem is Silverwolf isn't a character which you can get for free, unlike Bronya. You actually have to pull her. And would I pull Silverwolf right now over Cypher? The answer is probably not. Cypher's better in Acheron teams, Cypher's better in Fei Xiao teams, Cypher's mostly better in Archer teams. So yeah, unless you're brute forcing weaknesses, then Silverwolf just isn't the best in slot option, unfortunately, even though her buff was actually decent. She is a decent unit. Like I said, she just needs a character, or rather a DPS, where she's best in slot for them. And then Luocha, kind of similar issue to Bailu and Japad. He just kind of lacks the utility that a lot of modern supports have. Although his healing is very, very good. He's still very good in Mighty teams. Also in Blade teams, but Blade kind of wants Hyacinth nowadays, unless he has his E1. In which case you can get away with Luocha, but if you're running an E0 Blade, you probably kind of need Hyacinth. So yeah, Luocha, although I absolutely love him, definitely needs C tier, even though you can get his Eidolons from that brand new token exchange. Unfortunately, his Eidolons just won't really save him. So yeah, even though his Eidolons are actually obtainable for free-to-plays without having to pull for them, it won't make much of a difference for him. And then next up we have Acheron, who is our first character. Actually, it's not Acheron, oh my god. Our next character is Kafka, who is one of the highest ranking members here. Now, obviously, we considered Hysolins the DPS in Dot last time. I think nowadays, Kafka used to be considered kind of like a DPS-ish character, although nowadays she is much more of an enabler for Dot teams, which is why she is now on the support tier list, and she is very, very good at supporting Dot teams. just pair her along with Hysons, and that's basically all you need for that. Black Swan, of course, is very good as the third slot, although you could honestly, it's so strong you could run anyone in the third slot, to be honest. So yeah, Kafka is very strong after her buffs. If this was before her buffs, you're looking at something like this. But hey, our first version 1 character, probably the only version 1 character, who will be in the S tier and above. So yeah, hooray for Kafka. And then next up we have Fu Xuan, and unfortunately we are going back down into the lower tiers. We will have to go back down into the C tier. Honestly, with how many enemies just have massive kind of like execute / nuke style attacks, her sustain definitely does struggle a bit more. On the bright side, her E1 is obtainable by losing the 50/50s, although that is slightly random. And then even then, her E1 is only a crit damage boost, so you kind of want, if you want her sustain to be even better, I believe you need some of her later. Although, actually, does she? I don't quite remember what Fu Xuan's E2 does. I don't remember if it's more damage focus or if it's more sustain focus, if I'm being entirely honest. So that's actually kind of bad for me. But yeah, even with E1, her sustain doesn't get that much better, although she has decent utility, giving you, I believe it's 10% crit rate and 30% crit damage at E1. It just unfortunately isn't really enough to compare to some of the newer sustainers. So, she could possibly go up into the B tier, although I think if we're running for a safe placement, we'll probably have to put her in the C tier, although I would love for her to get a buff. Next up, we have another sustainer in the form of Ho Ho, and Ho Ho will actually be going into the B tier. There is a case for her to go down now that Aglaya has Dunhung PT, and then Dot can also use Dunhung PT. Ho Ho is very skill point intensive. Her sustain is also kind of similar to Fu Xuan's in that nowadays it struggles a bit more to keep up, but I think she can just about squeak her way into the B tier. But unfortunately, I feel like she probably will be going down in the future, although for the time being she can hold onto the B tier. Now next up we have Ruanmei, and honestly I'm very conflicted on where to put Ruanmei. Technically her E2 is obtainable for free. If we were to consider her, I'd probably consider E1 sooner than E2. So yeah, I'd say probably would have to put her at the A tier. Super Break is fallen off a lot. If Super Break was in a better slot, she could probably go in S tier, because she is 1, a very universal support, and 2, she is she's very good in Super Break, although with Super Break falling off, there is definitely a possibility that Super Break will come back with a brand new support, potentially, but for the time being, Super Break's just in a rough spot. In my DPS tier list, they ranked in the C tier, which on this tier list would be roughly B tier, just because, like I said, that one had one more ranking, that one had an E tier. But yeah, with Super Break kind of in the mud right now, Ruanmei would also probably be the first character replaced if Super Break were to get a brand new support. I mean, they made Fugue just for Super Break, so probably wouldn't be her getting replaced, and wouldn't be Linkshot getting replaced because she's the sustainer, unless you're doing sustainers. But even then, technically you could run Harmony MC as well. So yeah, although Ruanmei is a very good universal support actually, and also she has a useful niche, unfortunately that niche just isn't enough to bring her back into the S tier, so unfortunately for the time being she'll have to be in the A tier. But like I said, very good a replacement character, especially if they're not attack scalers. For example, in the past she was decent in Castrus teams, Archer teams, Saber teams, if you don't have the likes of Robin, Tribby, stuff like that, although you're probably not clearing in the recommended amount of cycles in Memory of Chaos with her. In Apoc Shadow she definitely has a niche use case, but I think for the time being she'll just have to be in the A tier. Next up we have Black Swan, who will actually be joining Ruanmei in the A tier. Prior to Kafka's buff, I'd actually say that Black Swan was probably the better unit than Kafka. She could be used in Dot-Cron teams. She had some niche cases in other teams basically, and then in Dot, kind of, I think that Kafka couldn't really function without Black Swan in Dot, whereas Black Swan as a unit functioned without Kafka, even though she wouldn't function in Dot without Kafka. But after Kafka's buff, I feel like Black Swan has kind of taken a backseat, and Heisland's release, so I would put her still in the A tier. You could make a case for her maybe being in the B tier, but I think just that brand new premium Dot team is just so strong that we kind of need to put Black Swan in the A tier for the time being, although if something changes in the future then it is definitely possible for her to go down. Now next up we have Sparkle, and Sparkle is a very interesting unit in that prior to Archer's release she had 0 good teams. Now with Archer's release she has 1 strong team, possibly a top 5 team in the game. I'd say probably maybe just about outside the top 5 would be maybe my hot take. I know a lot of people say Archer is one of the best DPS characters in the game. I don't have Sparkle, so I can't really speak on that, because Sparkleless Archer is not very good whatsoever. I don't think I don't think Archer's better than the top 4 DPS characters to me, that being Casterus, Evernight, and Nexa alongside Finon. Maybe he slots in the 5th slot, but is that enough to elevate Sparkle? I think probably not. I'd put Sparkle in the B tier. Having only one best in slot team, which isn't one of the top 4, isn't enough to get you out of the B tier. Prior to this, she would have honestly been low C tier, maybe even D tier, although I think she will have to be in the B tier. Even in teams like Finon, I just wouldn't want to use Sparkle. In a lot of teams, I just rather use Bronyo than Sparkle. So yeah, Sparkle will have to go ahead and go in the B tier. Now next up we have Aventurine. Aventurine's an interesting unit. His sustain's very good, although other than that, he doesn't really have a best in slot team. I don't think there's much reason why I'd use Aventurine over Dunhung PT from a utility / damage point of view. The only thing I'd use him for was maybe if he has better sustain in that situation. So he'd have to go either in the A tier or the B tier. I think for the time being, I'll place him in the B tier. Obviously, like I said, if this was a sustain tier list, he'd probably be in the A or S tier, because this is looking at every single support in the game, then he'll probably have to be in the B tier. Now, next up we have Robin, and Robin will be going alongside Ranmei. I think you can actually I think when Robin first released, there was a argument that Ranmei was slightly better, but then after a while, especially after Face Shot's release, I think Robin was considered the better unit. But then after we now have, if you own Ranmei, you have her E1 obtainable for free. If you don't own Ranmei, you have her obtainable for free. And so yeah, I think Ranmei is a more accessible unit right now, and the fact that Amphorius released with a lot of non-attack scaling characters actually makes Ranmei maybe slightly better than Robin again. So I'd probably do something like this if I were to rank them within the tier. But yeah, either way, I just think that Robin and Ranmei are in a pretty similar tier, where right now they're not really best in slot for many teams, but they're a very viable alternative in many teams, so she will be going in the A tier from me. Now Jiacho is also a unit who is pretty decent in quite a lot of teams, although his best in slot team with Akron was unfortunately yanked away from him. I would have put Jiacho in the B tier, but after Silverwolf's buff and Cypher's release, honestly, Jiacho might have to go down to the C tier. Like, when Casterus released, Jiacho was probably a B tier unit, but then after, and then you could actually use him as a viable alternative to Tribi if you were using Ranmei on your other half. But he doesn't even have that use case anymore. They've just taken everything away from Jiacho. First they took away his eyes, then they took away his Akron, and then they took away his everything by buffing Silverwolf as well as releasing Cypher. So yeah, things have only been down for Jiacho since 3.3 and onwards. So unfortunately, he'll probably have to go in the C tier. Next up, we have Lingsha. Lingsha is a pretty decent sustainer. Probably would put her on the same tier as Aventurine. The problem for Lingsha, of course, is that once again, Super Break is just in a pretty bad spot. You can do an interesting thing with Lingsha in that you can go Ranmei, Fugue, as well as Harmony MC, and then run Lingsha as the DPS / sustain in one in modes like Pure Fiction. If there's like a lot of fire weakness, although I think nowadays that probably works a bit less than it used to in the past, especially if your team is for the E0, even with an E1 Ranmei. So yeah, unfortunately, she's gonna have to go ahead and go in the B tier. And I think I will round off the B tier with one more unit, that being Fugue. Like I said, Super Break is kind of dead, although Fugue herself is a very strong unit. Like I said, this would kind of be around the placement of the DPSs I put for the Super Break archetype. She has kind of, we've seen a bit more Super Break buffs in Pure Fiction and Anomaly Arbitration recently, so will Fugue go up in the future to maybe like an A tier? Possibly, although for the time being, I'd probably have to go ahead and put her in the B tier. But next up, we have our final unit of the version 2 cycle, that being Sunday, and Sunday, I would go ahead and put in the double S tier. He is the best hyper carry support in the game. He's very good in Finon, he's very good with Anexa, he's very good with Aglaya, he's very good with Mighty as well. He used to be decent with Cassius, although the synergy wasn't perfect, but after Cyrene, Evernight, Tribi, and Hyacinth, there's just way too, and RMC's buffs as well, there's just way too much competition for Sunday now in Cassius teams. But like I said, Mighty, Aglaya, Anexa, Finon, a lot of very good team options where he's either best in slot or second best in slot, basically. So yeah, And then moving into the... Oh, and also he's very good for a lot of older units as well. Jingliu Blade as well, who got buffs as well. E1 Blade with Sunday plus Tribi plus Hyacinth is actually a force to be reckoned with. So if you were to get an E1 Blade from the 50-50 losses, I envy you because I still don't. And next up here, we're actually going to go for another SS tier. This is Remembrance MC. If Remembrance MC hadn't gotten buffed, then maybe I would have put him in the S tier. But with just how strong and Evernight's release, now that they have basically 2 best in slot DPS teams and then other DPS teams where they're very good as well. With Cyrene's release, you have a lot of new opportunities for RMC, and then, like I said, alongside with their new best in slot Lightcon, as well as the brand new passive they got, or Trace, whatever you want to call it. I do actually consider them SS tier, and then, of course, you get all of that for the cost of $3.99. That being free as in free, not as in the number 3, of course. Anyway, moving up next into the oh my god, we're on a SS tier. We're on a generational SS tier run. Tribi, best universal support in the game. She basically stole the role of Rowan May as well as Robin, but then she's also best in slot in a couple of other teams as well. You know, think about Archer teams, think about Saber teams. To be fair, for Archer, I'm not sure if she's best in slot, but she's up there with Cypher. And then, you know, also Saber teams, Casper's teams, very good as well. Evernight teams also very solid. And then Alexa teams also very solid. So yeah, there's just Tribi is just undeniable right now. Even at E0, she's probably the best universal support in the game. And then in Pure Fiction, she's an absolute game changer as well. And then, you know, she's just good for a lot of older units. Like I said, once again, Blade, Mighty, Jingliu, those kind of HP scaling hyper carries. And finally, for our final SS tier unit, we're going to be going for Hyacinth, best sustainer in the game. Not free, but she's just so strong. First of all, sustain-wise, probably the most comfortable unit in the entire game, because she increases her max HP and has an insane amount of healing. Strongest, probably the strongest utility-wise. Very good DPS numbers, definitely the highest amongst the sustain class, and then possibly also the highest buffing. So, you know, you have the best buffing, best sustaining, best damaging sustain unit. Where else would you put her other than the SS tier? Absolute game changer for the likes of Casper's as well as Evernight teams. I was about to say Siren, that was not the name I was looking for. And next up we have Cypher. Cypher is interesting. I'll go ahead and put Cypher in the A tier. She's not best in slot in basically any team, but then kind of similar to other units. She's just a very good universal option. You know, you could, I mean, I guess she's best in slot for Fei Xiao, and then she's very, very good in what's his face, Archer teams as well. Actually, you know what? We'll put the cat in S tier. We can probably put the cat in S tier, although we'll see when other rankings come in. Like I said, she has a lot of use cases, just not one where she's probably the best in slot option. Next up we have Saridra. And I don't know whether to put Saridra in the S tier, SS, or I have to put a Saridra in the A tier, to be honest. She only has 2 best in slot teams, and I would argue she only has 2 teams which she's worth using her in. Maybe unless you're a believer in Saridra in Jingliu teams, and although she doesn't even benefit from attack, or if you're a believer in Saridra in Saber teams, but I'd rather use Robin or Tribi, then she's basically best in slot in no other teams whatsoever. When it comes to final teams, she's very strong, obviously, although I think at E0S0 Saridra for E0S0 final, like I said, I don't think it's actually that different than the likes of an E2 Bronya, which, like I said, is accessible for free-to-play, so we can actually consider here. I actually don't think she's that much of an upgrade, alongside the fact that for Alexa teams, Alexa has a lot of team options. You could just run Sunday Tribi, Sunday Siren. Like I said, Sunday Saridra definitely is the best team option, but Sunday Dunhung PT is just such a strong core that you can just slot in basically any third unit and it will make a good team. So unfortunately, because of the fact that she basically only has 2 teams, I think I kind of have to put Saridra in the A tier. Like I said, I'm not even the biggest fan of the final team. Although the final team with Siren and Saridra feels good to play, without Siren, you know, just the Sunday Saridra team, although it is technically probably the best team, it just doesn't feel as good to play at E0S0. So I just, like I said, I'd maybe even rather use an E2 Bronya, E1 Bronya maybe even. Obviously E1 Bronya isn't as good, but I don't think I can justify putting for Saridra unless you want the best performance for your Finon or for your Anexa if you love them and you want them to perform the best, yes, pull for Saridra. But for a meta perspective, when we want to consider what's best for your account, I'd say maybe Saridra isn't the best option. You can definitely pull her if you have the unit she's best for, but I wouldn't consider pulling her first and then pulling for the other units. Dunhung PT is a free sustain unit, very, very strong. Probably the second best sustainer we have, very comfy. Also very good utility-wise, does basically no damage. But with the fact that he can enable Sunday's full buffs, by giving your character a summon, as well as the Panorama set, which benefits from having summons, then I'd say he can probably squeeze his way into the S tier. And then finally we have Cyrene, and honestly Cyrene is the reason why Saridra isn't in the S tier. If this was before Cyrene release, I'd probably do that. But after Cyrene's release, I feel like Cyrene can kinda take her slot in the likes of Finon teams or Nexa teams. I don't think she's quite as strong as Saridra in those teams, but she is a decent alternative. But then, unlike Saridra, she has a lot of teams where you can use her. Evernight teams, best in DPS Evernight teams, best in slot. DPS Castrus teams, best in slot. Aglaya, Mighty teams, also very strong. And then you also add in the fact that she's strong in Finon as well as in Nexa teams. Then I would definitely put Cyrene in the S tier. Slightly missing out on the SS tier, but I would definitely put her in at least the S tier. So yeah, that's probably my ranking. I think Cypher could go down, Saridra maybe could go up, but I think I'd rather have these two this way. Honestly, maybe I'm more inclined to say that this is a bit more accurate, but with the fact that Cypher is very good in Archer teams, I guess that will kind of be the kicker, which will put her up into the S tier for me. So yeah, this is how the rest of I guess Aventurine could go up, you could go down, you could go up, but other than that, I don't think there's many big changes that I'd make or argue against. So yeah, that's probably gonna end up being my tier list. Top 4 units in the game, top 8 units in the game, top 10 units in the game. I also want to say, you shouldn't pull based off this tier list, even though I just gave my pulling recommendations. That's purely from a meta perspective. End of the day, Star Rail is a game. Games are supposed to be fun, and I think the most fun way of playing the game is pulling your favorite DPS characters and then pulling these supports which make them feel the best. Yeah, with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed. Like I said, this is just for a bit of fun, so, leave down your thoughts, but try to keep it civil and not toxic down below. With that being said, I'll see you guys next time. See ya.